So, chapter 1149 of One Piece has officially leaked. Well, at least the Raws have, and using my rudimentary Japanese skills and a little thing known as Google Translate, I have effectively cobbled together everything that happens in this insanely packed chapter. See, because not only did this chapter see the full-on defeat of one of the holy knights in Elbaph, but it also thrust forward possibly the death of one of the coolest and most powerful characters recently introduced in the story, all while ending on a cliffhanger that not only confirmed Gunkko's connection to Emu, but also set up the idea that either the Revolutionary Army or Blackbeard is currently attacking Marie Joie, and things are not going well for Marie Joie. Listen, in my 3 weeks to a month of being caught up with One Piece, this is the most hype chapter to have released, and I cannot wait to talk to you all about it. So with no further ado, let's get directly into chapter 1149 of One Piece Explained. But if you guys are also looking for one additional Nick video a month, you can find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in the description below. We are on to the Chunin exams. Listen, when I say that I had to translate this chapter myself, I'm not kidding. These are my translations. Chapter 1149 picks up exactly where chapter 1148 left off, with Scopper, yes, not Scooper, I'm sorry, I can't read apparently, Kaban slicing down Holy Knight Sommers. And in the first 5 panels of this chapter, we get the reactions of the 5 captured Straw Hats, being Nami, Jinbei, Usopp, Nico, Robin, and Brook, as they react to the Holy Knight that's holding them with thorns being sliced down in one cut. Now it's revealed in this moment by narrator Sama that the attack that Scopper used is known as Heavenly Musical Axe, and the black lightning that's coming off it seems to all but confirm that the reason that Scopper is able to injure somebody like Sommers, a Holy Knight who should supposedly be immortal and therefore should be able to regenerate the hand that Scopper just cut off, is that Scopper has access to either a different level or a higher level of Conqueror's Haki that's able to counteract the powers of the Mark of the Abyss. Now Sommers, who presumably hasn't been cut for real in a long time, screams out in pain as Usopp asks, oh, why are his attacks working when ours didn't? Meanwhile, Scopper just laughs to himself and talks about how his axes have clearly dulled. Now, Sommers does eventually get up, and he launches thorns up from the ground to protect himself. As he asks Scopper, Mountain Eater, why are you here in Elbaph? Now, for those of you who don't remember, Scopper is known as the Mountain Eater because he once defended Goldie Roger while he was injured from legions of pirates, and the fight against these literal hundreds of pirates was so violent that by the end of it, an entire mountain range had been stripped of its vegetation. And thus, Scopper is now known as the Mountain Eater. Now, it's at this point that the captured Straw Hats begin to realize what exactly is going on here. As Usopp realizes that it is Scopper who's come to their rescue, the man who Zoro and Luffy fought against in the castle. Usopp, or maybe Nami, actually. I don't know, the speech bubbles aren't like incredibly clear. Talk about how they were overwhelmed in this battle between Luffy, Zoro, and Scopper. But it is at this point that Usopp yells out, but wait, Scopper is Cologne's dad. And the group collectively begins to realize that this is Scopper Gaban, the left hand of Goldie Roger, the counterpart to Silver's Rayleigh. And Chopper, who is still currently hidden in Saul's hair, realizes as he's watching this fight between Sommers and Scopper that the attacks that Scopper are using are working when nobody else's did. Now it's this point that Robin begins to struggle against her thorn constraints, using her Hana no Mi to create new hands to try and pull the thorns off herself. Jinbei urges her not to do that because these are iron thorns and she's using her real life flesh to try and rip these thorns off her, and therefore she has a bad compatibility for working against this devil fruit power. Now to this point that the intensity of the battle between Sommers and Scopper hits its boiling point, as Sommers yells out in disgust and anger as he thrusts a legion of thorns in Scopper's direction. However, Scopper isn't phased. I mean, cutting down vegetation is kind of his thing. And as he begins to close the distance on Sommers using his axes as hatchets, Sommers screams out, "Come on!" as Scopper yells out his apparent legendary move, Heavenly Music Axe, as he slices Sommers in twain, effectively cutting him in half from the heart up. But Scopper realizes that even now that he's cut Sommers in half, his thorns are still everywhere, and that he's about to land on them, and thus he plants his axe in the ground and launches himself forward in a spiral beyond the thorns that Sommer had created. And Sommers does not heal, but he also doesn't die. See, this would have been a pretty violent death, especially for One Piece. However, it appears as though even though Scopper is able to negate the regeneration factor of the Holy Knights, their immortality is still in effect. So while they may not be able to regenerate from the injuries given to them by somebody like Scopper, it appears as though Scopper still can't technically kill them. This is further illustrated by the fact that Somers falls back onto the bed of thorns that he created and is impaled by the power of his own devil fruit, and yet is still alive. Now, to this point, that Chopper dashes out of Soul's hair, following after Scopper, which causes all of the captured Straw Hats to yell out at Chopper and ask what exactly he's doing. And what he's doing is A, following Scopper, and B, screaming at the top of his lungs a question to Scopper, which is, how were you able to injure Somers? See, well, I can sit here and say that it's been confirmed that it was some new higher level of Conqueror's Haki. It technically hasn't been 100% confirmed. We have a fair amount of visual hints as to what power Scopper was using, but no one sat us down as the reader and truly explained to us what's going on here. And that appears to be what Chopper is trying to get. However, Chopper doesn't get an answer. Oh, it's important to note here that when Scopper was sprinting away, he was telling Cologne to wait. Is it colon? Like the body part colon, or is it Cologne? It's not Cologne. I'm going with colon because I don't want to call a child's colon, but that's how it's spelled. Anyways, we cut to the library. It's on fire. Anji, the librarian and Saul's right-hand woman, was told at the end of chapter 1148 to burn down the library to save the children. And thus it's being revealed that she did that, though the fire is still in the beginning phases. Now, St. Killingham is watching the library burn next to the crying Anji. But St. Killingham realizes that the entire library is not on fire. Most specifically, maybe, I can't necessarily confirm this, but maybe the part of the library we were shown by Saul that had all of the books of Ohura, and thus St. Killingham, in order to make sure that all of the history of Elbaph and all of the information about the Void Century goes up in a puff of smoke, pulls out a bow, creates a fire arrow, and is about to launch it at this one non-burning section of the library before we cut to Gunkko. Now, Scopper has made it to Gunkko in literally record time, and as he's sprinting towards her, he's telling her about how the children, military power, and history of Elbaph will never go up in flames, and how they most definitely will not bend a knee to the government. Now, as Scopper is yelling about preserving Elbaph's pride and history, Gunkko realizes not only that it's Scopper running at her, but also who Scopper is, which was Goldie Roger's left-hand man, something that a lot of people bring up in this chapter. But she says, even though you were the left hand of Goldie Roger and one of the most powerful pirates in existence, your resistance will kill children. That is to say, in simpler terms, that if Scopper resists against Gunkko, Gunkko will kill the giant children that she still has hostage. Now, those very same giant children, upon seeing Scopper, all revel because they know how crazy powerful he is. And it's this point that Scopper begins to yell out to Kalon because he can see him. But that may have not been the best idea, because Kalon immediately makes himself a target by waving his hands at his father and talking about how his father is the strongest pirate of them all, and now that his father is here, they're all gonna be safe, which obviously Gunkko realizes immediately that, oh yeah, that's the important hostage, let's take that one. But before Scopper can save anybody or Scopper and Gunkko can cross blades, Scopper tries to attack the arrow that's forcing the children to walk towards the ledge. Now, it's at this point that we once again cut back to the burning library, and we see the reactions from everybody on Elbaph to the news that the history of Elbaph and the information about the Void Century is currently burning. We see the horrified faces of Robin and Saul, and we see Chief Jarl crying about the idea that the identity of the giants has now been stripped away from him as the villagers around them try to console him, because fundamentally the choice to burn down the library was his call, and even though he was doing it to save the lives of children, this can very clearly be displayed as Elbaph bending a knee to the government, and as the government's main ploy is to strip the giants of all of their identities and turn them into mindless drones, and powerful mindless drones at that. Chief Jarl feels as though he's brought the giants one step closer to that eventuality. Now, in a rather weird page that feels semi-disconnected from literally everything else that's going on in this chapter, Killingham reports to well, now that I'm thinking about it, is it Gunkko or Gunkko? I feel like either could work. It's probably Gunkko, right? Because Gunkko would be an O. I'm bad at One Piece names. Anyways, Killingham reports to Gunkko that the library is burning and that the children don't have to die. And thus Gunkko tells Ranja, who's on one of her arrows over the ledge of Elbaph's border, to step on back from the proverbial end of the plank. Now, this is like obviously good news. We don't have to watch the girl who last chapter was named after die, but it's also like not good news. news, at least to Ranja, as she feels partially responsible for the burning down of the library, and therefore she apologizes to everyone for being alive. With tears in her eyes, she wholeheartedly apologizes for being the hindrance that she believes that she is. But both the children present and the Dory and Broggy pirates all tell Ranja that it's not her fault, that they would rather have her alive than the information in the library, because while the books and history are great, the identity of the giants is one that wouldn't allow for their children to be needlessly slaughtered. Now, like I said, this is a weird edition of this page, not because this information wasn't crucial. I mean, obviously it was, but mostly like because of when it was given to us. I mean, we literally just showed that Scopper is within earshot of Gunkko, and he's actively attacking Gunkko's arrow that's making the children march to their deaths, and yet Gunkko's taking the time to turn to Ranja and be like, hey, the library's burning, you can step up off that ledge, honey. When we literally just established last chapter that Scopper is so fast he was able to speed blitz Sommers, another holy knight. It's even weirder when you consider that on this page, Gunkko is very clearly shown standing next to Ranja. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's Ranya, once again. New to this, but Gunkko literally goes from standing next to Ranya to standing on her arrow with her blade to Cullen's neck. And like, we see the trail of the arrow that led her to Cullen's neck, but still, was Scopper just waiting for her to free Ranya? It's just a weird series of events. Anyways, yeah, Gunkko thrusts her blade into Cullen's neck, but like not all the way. She's just holding her blade to Cullen's neck. And she screams out to Scopper that if Scopper pushes her, she'll push this sword into the neck of Scopper's child. Now, Scopper yells out to Cullen to be patient and that he's strong, to reach down into the warrior inside of him and find strength in this scary moment. And on the next page, Cullen screams out about how he's a warrior and how his father shouldn't worry about him while stifling back tears. But Gunkko lets Scopper know that she will not step down. Now, at this point, that Scopper has a flashback to the moment of his son's birth, thinking back to the moment when Ripley, his common-law wife, gave birth to a baby bigger than him. Now, after this flashback, we also see Ripley crying out to her son and Scopper, telling the both of them that she is safe. But as she's yelling this, Gunkko proceeds to press her sword into Cullen's neck even harder, causing him to bleed. But Scopper begins to fly in, his face furious, his axe leaking with Conqueror's Hockey, black lightning firing in all direction as he thinks to himself to expand his observation hockey to think about what's going to happen in the future to see if he'll be able to close this gap, which quickly makes him realize that he can't. We'll see, while this moment is incredibly sick in the fact that it confirms Scopper as a future sight user, of which previously there was only 4, those 4 being Katakuri, Kaido, Shanks, and Luffy. Unfortunately, by accessing future sight in this moment, he saw the death of his son, and thus he immediately drops his axe and throws his hands up and tells Gunkko that he forfeits. And after he forfeits, he apologizes to Elbaph, as he believed that he stood as their last bastion of hope in this fruitless struggle against the Holy Knights. Now, Gunkko takes her blade away from Scopper's son's neck and points it at him and scoffs at his weakness as she pierces him through the chest with 3 arrow blades, force of which sends Scopper over the ledge of Elbaph, sending him falling down what should surely be a deadly distance. And as he falls, he apologizes to his son, who calls out to him while crying, and the children, who are still walking closer and closer to the edge, react to watching Ya-san fall off the edge, presumably to his death. Now, it's this point that we cut to Brook, who's thinking about how similar Gunkko looks to somebody he used to know, all while Usopp screams about how they need to escape. But as Usopp is yelling about how they need to escape, he says Brook's name. And Gunkko, immediately upon hearing the name Brook, says, Brook? You said your name was Brook, and begins to run towards him. Now, it's important to note here that in chapter 1146, it was actually Brook who pointed out to the rest of the Straw Hats that were later captured. When Jinbei and Usopp assumed that Gunkko was a celestial dragon, it was actually Brook who pointed out to them that Gunkko was probably something above a celestial dragon, a holy knight, something that we've never seen the Straw Hats interact with prior to Elbaph. And thus, how does Brook know about the Holy Knights, and why does he know what they look like / function like? Well, the answer may lie in his connection to Gunkko. Now, it's corroborated by what happened in chapter 1147, where Gunkko, after capturing all of the Straw Hats, pointed out Brook and says, I want you to write me music for the rest of your life. To which Brook said, no, I only do that for Luffy, at which point Gunkko was like, well, what if I kill you? And he was like, yeah, that sounds okay, I've done that before. And thus it was clear that in some capacity, Gunkko at least knew the Soul King, but it appears as though it goes one step further than that, and that Gunkko doesn't just know the Soul King, but rather Brook. However, before Gunkko can get too deep into her realization that it was Brook that she had cornered, a voice rings in the ears of all three holy knights. And who is it other than Emu? See, Emu gets on the horn and asks why it's taking so long for them to burn down Elbaph. And he lets them know that Marijwa needs their military power because apparently Marijwa has fallen under siege and that the Holy Land is now awash in flames. Now, Emu doesn't reveal to us who is attacking Marijwa. It could be Blackbeard. It could be the Revolutionary Army. They both have reasons to attack Marijwa, and they both have the military might to launch a pretty impressive offensive against Marijwa, so much so that they'd be able to light the whole thing on fire. Now, it's this point when Emu is talking about how the Holy Knights are needed back at home that all of the giant children who are standing next to Gunkko begin to talk about how scary her face has become. We then get real close to Gunkko's face as she presumably has a flashback about her childhood with presumably a live Brook, but maybe already dead Brook, but that seems highly unlikely considering the fact that after he died, he was floating on a boat in the middle of nowhere, not interacting with anybody. And Gunkko, if I know Oda, is at least 16, and the child depicted in this memory with Brook looks 3, 4, maybe? Now, some of you may be asking, well, then if Gunkko was like 16 years old, how would the child version of her ever have interacted with a live Brook? And that's a pretty legit question. Brook spent 50 years by himself alone on the ghost ship that previously belonged to his pirate crew, and it also took him a year to find his own body, which is why he currently exists as a skeleton. So if a live Brook was interacting with the child, that child would have been a child like 50 plus years ago. And here's the thing, that may be a possibility. We don't know how old Gunkko is, but it does appear as though when Gunkko was a child, maybe that was half a century ago, that she was with Brook, and that while she was Brook, either Brook or her, it's actually not all that clear, said that one day it's my dream to be a pirate. Now, mind you, at this point, it appears as though Brook is already carrying a sword on him, something he did while he was alive, and something he now does after being dead. And therefore, at this moment in time, Brook was probably already a pirate, and therefore is probably Gunkko saying that when she grows up, she wants to be a pirate. Especially because she's the child in this equation and Brook is the full-grown adult. And thus the probable reason that Brook isn't able to recognize Gunkko, or at least not immediately, is because he knew her as a child. But Gunkko and Brook's possible 50-year in the past connection is not the only thing revealed here, because when Emu hops on the line with all of the Holy Knights, what does Gunkko say other than father? Question mark? Revealing a theory that many have believed for a couple of months now, basically ever since it was revealed that Gunkko appears to have at least some kind of connection to Emu because their eyes, or at least one of Gunkko's eyes, looks similar to that of Emu, and thus the idea that Gunkko is the daughter of Emu has been confirmed. This is also, so far as I believe, I might be wrong here, the first time that Emu has technically ever been gendered, revealing, at least to me, but once again, I could be wrong here, that Emu is a man. And considering the fact that one of the leading theories for Emu's identity is Nefeltari D. Lily, the queen of Alabasta from 800 years ago, the idea that Gunkko is referring to Emu as father kind of throws a spanner in those works. Now, technically, I'd like to highlight the fact that there is a possibility that Gunkko is actually referring to Brook as father. The literal next panel is Emu taking over Gunkko's body, with Emu's power radiating out of Gunkko and both of Emu's eyes becoming present on Gunkko's face. It seems as though the father-daughter connection is more apparent with Emu than it is with Brook. Now listen, this is me translating the chapter with my rough Japanese skills, but Otosan is one of the first words you learn in Japanese, and she is very clearly saying that. So yeah, Emu is probably Gunkko's father, and more importantly than that, Emu is currently controlling Gunkko's body and is therefore on Elbaph. Oh, and he's pissed, as the last thing said in this chapter is, "Let me show you how the power of a ruler can get things done," implying that things are about to go real haywire for the Straw Hats and all of the giants on Elbaph. And considering the fact that we saw literally nothing from Luffy this chapter whatsoever as to who is going to stand in the way of the destructive power of Emu, well, your guess is as good as mine. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think about this chapter? What do you think about the reveal of Emu and Gunkko's relationship? How do you think Brook and Gunkko know each other? Do you think Scopper is still alive? Do you think Emu is about to tear Elbaph in half? Let me know about it in the comments below. There's so much to talk about. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Gunkko, Colin, Scopper. I think those are all the ones I mispronounced.